A freshman congresswoman silenced her critics, rattled the Senate, and left Elizabeth Warren momentarily speechless. This wasn't just debate, it was the day Washington realized a new power had entered the game. The House Judiciary Committee hearing room pulsed with an unusual electricity as Representative Ted Lieu of California leaned into his microphone, his tone sharper than usual. For nearly 20 minutes, Representative Jasmine Crockett had been systematically taking apart his judicial reform proposal with precise constitutional references and meticulously chosen precedents. Lieu's patience was wearing thin. "Representative Crockett," he said firmly, his words echoing through the chamber. "Before we continue debating judicial qualifications, I think it's important to establish your own credentials. You've criticized my proposal in great detail, but what direct experience do you actually have in evaluating judicial nominees that qualifies you to dismiss the work of those who have been in this field for decades?" The chamber froze. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, caught off guard by the unusually direct challenge from two members of the same party. Journalists in the gallery leaned forward, their fingers ready on keyboards, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Crockett didn't flinch. For 3 long seconds she sat perfectly still, her face unreadable as she studied her colleague across the room. Then, with deliberate calm, she leaned forward, adjusted her microphone, and began speaking in a voice that was both steady and commanding. "Congressman Lieu," she said, her tone measured but unwavering. "Before entering Congress, I not only practiced before the very judges your legislation seeks to evaluate, but I also served for 7 years on the State Judicial Nomination Commission. In that role, I personally vetted 118 judicial candidates using the same constitutional standards your bill is attempting to reinterpret." She paused, her eyes locking on Lieu. "Would you like me to walk this committee through which specific provisions of your proposal contradict established Article 3 jurisprudence? Or should we first discuss the Davidson precedent, something, it seems, your staff has overlooked?" A visible shift ran across the room. Lieu's expression hardened, caught between irritation and discomfort. The gallery buzzed with hushed whispers as seasoned correspondents froze mid-keystroke, recognizing the magnitude of the exchange. Crockett's response wasn't defensive, it was authoritative. In one precise moment, she had flipped Lieu's challenge back on him, exposing not only her own deep qualifications but also the vulnerabilities in his legislation. The silence that followed Crockett's words was more powerful than any outburst. Every head in the chamber seemed to turn toward her, measuring the weight of her response. The young congresswoman had not just answered a challenge, she had dismantled it with surgical precision, forcing her colleague into retreat before he could even mount his next argument. Ted Lieu shifted uneasily in his chair, his usual confidence cracking under the glare of both cameras and colleagues. He opened his folder as if searching for notes, but the gesture only underscored his loss of footing. What had been intended as a subtle reminder of hierarchy had turned into a glaring miscalculation. Crockett was no rookie fumbling for footing. She was a seasoned trial lawyer who had spent her career interrogating contradictions, and now she was turning those same instincts on Congress itself. From the press gallery, pens scratched furiously across notebooks. A few reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances. They knew they had just witnessed something rare, a freshman lawmaker not merely holding her own, but seizing control of the narrative. This was not the ordinary give-and-take of partisan sparring. It was something more dangerous, a direct assault on the unwritten rules of seniority and deference that had kept order in the chamber for decades. Across the dais, a few senior members leaned back in their chairs, their expressions carefully neutral, though some betrayed a flicker of unease. Crockett had done more than expose gaps in Lieu's legislation. She had exposed the complacency of the system itself. The realization rippled through the room. Here was a voice unwilling to play by the old scripts, a voice that could not be easily boxed in or silenced. And as Crockett sat back, her expression steady and her presence unshaken, it was clear to everyone in that room that a line had been crossed. What began as a hearing on judicial reform had transformed into something else entirely. A power struggle, raw and unscripted, that threatened to upend the balance within the very institution itself. The chamber seemed to pulse with an energy that no gavel could contain. For years, the Judiciary Committee had been a place of rehearsed speeches and predictable sparring, where the hierarchy was clear and newcomers were expected to wait their turn. But in that moment, All those traditions felt fragile. The hearing had slipped into uncharted territory, and everyone in the room could feel it. Bill O'Reilly, seated at the far end as a guest commentator, leaned forward with the sharp instinct of a man who had built his career on televised confrontations. His eyes glittered, sensing the kind of drama that cable news producers crave. Yet even he, a master of verbal combat, could not hide his unease. Jasmine Crockett had introduced a level of precision and composure that was impossible to spin away as mere theatrics. This was the language of the courtroom, the kind that carried consequences. Then came the moment that shifted everything further. Crockett, her voice calm but deliberate, cut through the buzz. "The true betrayal here isn't mine, Congressman Lieu. It's the willingness of this body to look away while executive power swallows whole the limits the Constitution sets. That silence is more dangerous than any bill or proposal on this table." Her words landed like a stone thrown into still water, the ripples spreading across every senator, every aide, every journalist scribbling in the gallery. It wasn't just an argument against one piece of legislation. It was an indictment of the institution itself. A direct challenge to the Senate's habit of selective blindness, and a reminder that silence, too, was a choice. Reporters erupted in whispers. Some scribbled faster, others exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They understood this was history disguised as committee procedure. A freshman was not only questioning her peer but daring to question the system that empowered him. To some, it was reckless. To others, it was revolutionary. But to everyone, it was unforgettable. Elizabeth Warren, long regarded as one of the Senate's sharpest minds, narrowed her eyes and adjusted her glasses. She had sparred with lobbyists, presidents, and billionaires, but something about Crockett's poise unsettled her. Warren knew the difference between a momentary flourish and a lasting statement, and this, she realized, was the latter. The hearing was no longer a debate. It was a duel. The silence that followed Crockett's declaration was suffocating. It pressed against the marble walls, hung heavy in the ornate chamber, and demanded acknowledgement. Senators who had once been casually leafing through documents now sat frozen, their expressions betraying the shock of watching an unspoken boundary shatter right before them. Elizabeth Warren cleared her throat, her fingers grazing the rim of her glasses as if adjusting them could steady the unease settling over her. For decades, she had been the one pressing others into corners, the one who exposed weak arguments and revealed hidden contradictions. But here, before her, a freshman lawmaker had thrown down a challenge not just to a colleague, but to the entire institution Warren herself had fought so hard to protect. It was a moment of reversal, and everyone in the room felt it. Crockett had not raised her voice, she had not gestured wildly, she hadn't needed to. Her weapon was clarity, and her composure made it all the more piercing. In contrast, Warren's hesitation, however brief, felt monumental. The camera lenses zoomed closer, capturing every flicker in her expression, ready to beam the hesitation across millions of screens. The reporters smelled blood. Pens flew across notepads, phones buzzed with hurried texts to editors. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was theater, a duel staged in real time, the kind that could launch or end political careers. And in the eyes of many watching, Crockett was no longer the untested freshman. She was a player who had forced the chamber to see her, whether they were ready or not. Some senators leaned back, masks of neutrality painted across their faces, while others whispered quietly to aides, measuring the fallout. It didn't matter which side of the aisle they belonged to, the calculation was the same. Jasmine Crockett had just proved that she was not bound by the traditions of silence and deference. She was rewriting the unspoken rules in front of them. The duel between the veteran and the newcomer was far from over, but one thing had become certain: the balance of power had shifted, and it would not shift back. When the gavel finally struck to adjourn the session, the chamber did not return to normal. The sound reverberated through the marble, but it felt more like punctuation to a statement that could not be contained. Lawmakers gathered their papers with stiff precision, disguising the nervous energy rippling through the room. Everyone knew they had just witnessed a moment that would be replayed endlessly, not because of the bill under discussion, but because of the clash that had stolen the spotlight. Elizabeth Warren, who so rarely faltered, walked out with her usual dignity, yet the faint stiffness in her shoulders betrayed the impact of what had transpired. She had not been defeated, her intellect and stature made her nearly untouchable, but she had been challenged in a way that left an unmistakable mark. Washington had a long memory, and this exchange would be whispered about in corridors and strategy rooms for weeks, perhaps months. In contrast, Jasmine Crockett left the chamber with quiet confidence, her stride measured but steady, her staff trailing close behind, eyes wide with the realization of what had just happened. She hadn't merely defended herself, she had seized the stage, reshaping the narrative before anyone else could claim it. For a freshman lawmaker, this was not survival. It was a declaration. The press wasted no time. Headlines lit up within hours: Freshman versus Titan, Crockett shakes the Senate. The moment silence spoke louder than power, Crockett's challenge, a new voice rises in Washington. Pundits dissected every pause, every glance, every carefully chosen word, debating whether it was strategy or instinct. But no matter the interpretation, the conclusion was clear. Crockett had arrived, and she could not be ignored. Outside, the steps of the Capitol buzzed with reporters, cameras flashing under the grey DC sky. As Crockett descended into the crowd, her calm expression suggested she was untouched by the storm she had ignited. Yet those who had been inside the chamber knew better. This was not just a hearing. It was the birth of a new force in American politics, a voice that had proven itself unafraid of silence, unafraid of power, and unafraid of the moment. And Washington would never look at her the same way again.